The man's name is Steven. He's a full-time hunter and a gourmet too. Today, he arrived at Prince of Wales Island ready to hunt a black bear. This place is remote, lush with vegetation, home to various wildlife. 10 years ago, Steven and some friends built a hunting cabin here, turning it into a paradise for outdoor activities. But keeping this place running takes a lot of work. Last August, after fishing, his friends closed the place. It's been 9 months with no visitors. Today, he came to check it out. Sure enough, it was a mess inside. Bears had turned it into a cozy den. Bearing the stench, Steven cleaned up inside. Then he headed to the creek to get the water system working again. It's a gravity-fed system that lets water flow through pipes. Steven cleaned the filter, placed it on a barrel, and positioned the pipes on top. Now the water system should work fine. Along the way, he removed air from the pipes to help the water flow faster. When he got back to the cabin, the taps worked. Then he chopped some wood and got the stove going. The cabin felt alive again. By lamplight, Steven started planning for tomorrow. The best place to find bears is at the river mouth. Every fall, bears fish there. Though it's not fall, bears still go there to eat grass or chew on shellfish. After doing his homework, Steven went to sleep. The next morning, he pulled out a small boat and fixed the motor. After some tinkering, he started the engine. It still worked. Steven loaded his gear onto the boat and set off. He was really looking forward to this adventure. The journey allowed him to enjoy various beautiful scenes, making him exceptionally content. This place is truly a haven for hunting and fishing. Even before arriving, Steven was trembling with excitement. The beach was covered with blue mussels, one of the black bear's favorite foods, and one of Steven's too. When he goes to restaurants, he always orders a dish of mussels. But wild mussels need extra caution, especially after red tides, as they might contain neurotoxins. Steven gathered a large pot full and carefully washed them in seawater. But just eating mussels wouldn't satisfy him. Before hunting the black bear, he set up crab and shrimp traps. This place is one of the crab hotspots. He threw the iron cages straight into the sea. Then he headed to where the prawns were active. There's a narrow bay here, with special terrain creating several sea pits. Prawns like to live in these areas. Steven threw the shrimp traps in. Now that the traps were set, it was time to look for the black bear. He slowly made his way through a series of narrow channels. Soon, he spotted 2 bears on the shore. They were huge, clearly not cubs anymore. But the 2 bears stuck together, likely siblings. They weren't the target Steven was after. He was looking for a fully mature black bear. So, he moved deeper in search of another bear. But the motorboat was too noisy, likely scaring off the bears. So, Steven switched to a canoe and paddled manually. Across, the snow-capped mountains were shrouded in mist, looking stunningly beautiful. Unfortunately, the heavy rain dampened his spirits. He paddled for an hour before spotting another black bear. Steven watched its movements closely. The bear jumped into the water and swam to the opposite shore. The deep water made it hard for Steven to see its true size. He followed behind until the bear reached the shore again. Then Steven was sure this was the bear he was looking for. Just as he was about to shoot, the bear quickly disappeared into the woods. Steven was frustrated as he missed a good opportunity. With evening approaching, he had to head back to the cabin. The next day, Steven returned to the same spot. After some searching, he finally saw a black bear. He tied his boat to a rock and crept closer. The bear was unaware of the danger, still eating, even as Steven raised his rifle. Just as he was about to shoot, another bear appeared from a different direction. This one was smaller, so Steven kept his aim on the first bear. But suddenly, a strange thought crossed his mind. He liked the bears and just wanted to watch them, not shoot them. Today, he felt unusually sentimental. Perhaps it was one of those days when men feel melancholy. Steven was just having one of those days. This was completely understandable. The bear had no idea it had just dodged a bullet. Steven packed up his mixed feelings, collected the crab traps, and found them full of plump crabs. The shrimp traps were also full of fat prawns. Back at the cabin, Steven was ready for a seafood feast. He cleaned the seafood, lit the stove, poured water into a pot, and added some salt. He learned this trick from a neighbor, making the water as salty as seawater. This method gave the crabs a sweet flavor. He wasn't sure why, but the crabs tasted really good. About 10 minutes later, he added the shrimp and mussels to the pot. At the same time, he boiled some cheese. The seafood was now cooked. Stephen peeled a shrimp, dipped it in butter, and tasted it. It was incredibly delicious. Then he started on the crabs, which were not only fresh, but the taste was absolutely fantastic. And the mussels were just as delicious. This seafood meal really satisfied Stephen. Even tough guys have their tender moments. Faced with the adorable black bears, Stephen suddenly couldn't bear to shoot. He chose to let them go. For a hunter like Stephen, this was a serious mental struggle. He needed to calm his emotions, not be so wound up about hunting. So this episode, he didn't go hunting. Instead, he planned a feast with his friends, enjoying the joy that good food brings. The main ingredient was a wild boar he had hunted earlier. Matt is his mentor in cooking, having taught Stephen many techniques. Today, Matt generously offered his kitchen and was ready to guide him on how to cook the boar's head. They also planned 3 other dishes, one with pork skin, one with sausages made from rib meat and intestines, and the last, a brined smoked ham. First, the boar's head needed to be pickled. They had soaked it in liquid the day before. Now, taking it out, you could smell the marinade, and the eyes turned a weird milky white. Next, they boiled the head face down until it was tender, preparing 4 pig's feet to cook with it. To remove any gamey taste, Stephen prepared some herbs and pepper, wrapped them in cheesecloth to make a bouquet garni, and tossed it into the pot. He also took out carrots, celery, onions, and leeks, adding them all to the pot. They prepared 2 cups of white wine and added enough water just to cover everything. Then, they let it stew for 3 to 4 hours. The next dish was the smoked ham, using the thigh of the wild boar. Though many large animals exist on this planet, few meats can compare to pork, according to Stephen. Matt's special brine would make the ham taste even more unique. The mixture included over a dozen ingredients, including brown sugar, orange peel, celery seeds, 5-spice, cloves, bay leaves, and more. This was a boneless thigh that had been soaking in the brine. Now, they took it out, sprinkled some gelatin powder on it, which is made from animal skin and bones through many processes, acting as a food additive to make the meat firmer. Stephen brought out a meat rolling machine, stuffed the meat inside, and fitted a net on the other end. By pressing, the meat was forced into the net, which kept it from spreading out. Then they tied it up in the smoker for a slow roast. After a long time had passed, the two opened the pot to check on the head. Most of the meat on the skull had fallen off, indicating it was almost done. Matt picked up a pig's foot, noting the large amount of fat and jelly-like gelatin, a sign that it was cooked perfectly. They took everything out and strained the cooking liquid to prepare for the next steps. Stephen was responsible for picking the meat off the skull, while Matt prepared the side dishes. Then they cut open the pig's feet and sliced the tongue into thin pieces. Mixing these together, put everything on a plate. Add spices and salt. Mix well, then pour in some vinegar. Set it aside on another plate. Add some cooking liquid. It's all full of collagen. Now the second dish is ready. Next up, the third dish. They washed the intestines and set them aside. Then, from the fridge, they took out a bowl of quality pork. Some side dishes were also prepared. Stephen was in charge of grinding the meat. Matt chopped the veggies. They divided the tasks clearly and quickly got everything ready. They mixed the veggies and ground meat together. After kneading them well to blend, they put the mix through a grinder again. This created finely textured sausages. The final step was stuffing the meat into the casings. This process had to be careful to avoid tearing the casings. Looking at the beautiful, sexy sausages, Stephen smiled with satisfaction. Matt held a wooden skewer, poking holes wherever he saw air bubbles. Finally, they rolled the sausages to equal lengths. Now it was time for the last dish: deep-fried pork skin, taken from the back of a wild boar. First, They cooked it in broth for several hours. This broth was a special preparation by Matt, blending various ingredients together and squeezing in some lime juice. After hours of cooking, the flavors infused into the pork skin. Now, Stephen cut the pork skin into slices and placed them in the oven to bake for a while. With guests arriving soon, Stephen grilled sausages outside, while Matt, inside, deep-fried the dehydrated pork skins in oil until they were crispy. He sprinkled some cumin on them. The taste was indeed crispy and delicious. Not only was the ham smoked perfectly, but the head meat had also set. They lifted the plastic wrap. The aspic was officially made. Stephen then sliced the ham, looking incredibly tasty. They laid all the dishes out on the table. Their guests had been waiting eagerly. They thoroughly enjoyed each dish, with laughter and chatter echoing around the table. Everyone had a delightful dinner. What does despair mean? It's when a hunter approaches an injured moose, and the rifle suddenly malfunctions, getting chased by the moose instead. At that moment, Stephen was terrified. This dramatic scene took place in the central region of British Columbia. Stephen is a full-time hunter and a gourmet. This time, he teamed up with his friend Ryan, coming to this dense marshland in search of moose. It was the mating season for moose, and the males were everywhere looking for mates. Ryan, skilled at calling, could imitate the sounds of a female moose, which was a big help for hunting. Following the stream, cutting through mountains and building bridges over water, they overcame numerous challenges and finally reached their destination. On the shore, there were not only moose tracks, but also bear paw prints. Everywhere was a sign that this was a wild kingdom. But before hunting moose, there was one more important thing to do. In this river lived a type of male trout. Stephen had never fished this type of fish before, so he wanted to fulfill a dream. To avoid harming the big fish, they used barbless hooks. The two of them quietly competed, and Ryan, the better angler, caught a male fish first. Not to be outdone, Stephen also successfully caught a trout. After admiring it, he released the fish. Now they could get on with their journey. They tied their boat to the shore and chose to proceed on foot. Ahead was a beaver pond, raised by the dams they built. Then suddenly, heavy rain started, making their trip even more challenging. As they moved, they kept an eye on their surroundings. Stephen faintly heard the call of a male moose in the distance. They immediately became alert and carefully moved towards the sound. Meanwhile, Ryan demonstrated his special skill, a perfect imitation of a moose call that floated off into the distance. This was sure to attract the attention of a male moose. After a quick discussion, they came up with a plan. Ryan would move away, imitating the call of a female moose, while Stephen stayed put. If all went to plan, he would face the approaching male moose head-on. To make it more realistic, Ryan rubbed branches while calling, simulating a female moose leaving the scene. This would make the male moose more anxious and less cautious. Unfortunately, despite calling for a long time, the moose did not appear. So, they continued in the direction of the sound. After walking a short while, Stephen suddenly signaled a stop. There seemed to be something ahead. They heard rustling sounds from the bushes. Sure enough, a moose emerged. Stephen took aim and fired decisively. After the gunshot, the moose disappeared into the bushes. Stephen was certain he had hit his target. Ryan was amazed. He hadn't seen anything before Stephen shot. After calming themselves, they began to track the moose. As they progressed, Stephen had a bad feeling. He had aimed for the heart, so the moose should have fallen. But there was no sign of it, suggesting he might have missed. And an injured moose could become extremely aggressive. Just as they decided to split up, Stephen spotted the moose again. He fired another shot, then quickly reloaded and chased after it. But the dense bushes severely blocked his view, and the moose had vanished. In the tense atmosphere, Stephen acted recklessly. Without being careful, he literally bumped into the moose around a corner. Seeing the moose stand up, Stephen prepared to end its life. But at the crucial moment, his rifle jammed. The shot wouldn't fire, and the moose charged at him. Terrified, Stephen panicked and ran, wishing he had 4 legs instead. Luckily, the moose was injured, which allowed him to gain some distance. Seeing his chance, Ryan decisively fired his gun, and this time, the moose finally fell. Steven was breathing heavily, trying to calm his excited nerves. Ryan couldn't resist teasing him, joking that he nearly got a new hole in his rear. After the joke, they went to check on the moose, finding it had stopped breathing. It was a huge animal, giving a strong visual impact. Suddenly, there was a thunderclap. A storm was likely coming. It looked like they'd be camping here tonight. They needed to go back to the boat for supplies, making some markers along the way. Soon, a downpour started, complete with hail. Truly a wild and unpredictable place. They made it back to the kill site against the wind and rain, started a fire, and began the cumbersome task of butchering. First, they skinned the moose, then cut the meat into different parts, packed them by category, and carried them to the shore one by one. When daylight broke the next day, they moved the meat onto the boat and set off for home. Floating downstream, they finally reached where they had parked. But before heading home, there was an important thing to do: enjoy the fruits of their hunt. Steven cut a tender piece of meat, preparing to grill some moose steaks. He also pulled off a moose bone, throwing it directly into the charcoal. The moose meat needed a bit of prep, so he sprinkled some salt on it, then placed it on a pan to fry, sizzling immediately. When the steaks were nearly done, they took out the large bone, cracked it open with a stone, and poured the marrow over the steaks. The marrow acted like butter, enhancing the flavor. They tasted it, finding it incredibly satisfying, a rare delight, seldom experienced. Ryan had never tasted such delicious food before, and he was deeply moved. The man, a hunter named Steven, bagged a moose, yielding 300 pounds of meat. He took the best cuts for steaks, poured the marrow from the thigh bones over them, and thoroughly enjoyed his meal. Steven is a full-time hunter and a gourmet. Today, he came to the southwestern mountains of Montana, prepared to hunt a Milu deer, believing its meat to be among the tastiest in the world. However, the complex terrain and cold weather made hunting Milu deer quite challenging. Adding to the trouble, other hunters were also in the area, creating a competitive situation. Luckily, his day started well. Upon arrival, he spotted several Milu deer, including a mature male. They were active on the hillside. Fully equipped, Steven set out, but soon he noticed something troubling on the snow-covered path. There were tracks from 3 sets of boots, indicating that 3 hunters were already on the trail of the Milu deer. Steven pulled out his binoculars to take a look, but he only saw 2 female deer, and the male Milu deer he had spotted earlier was nowhere to be seen. Steven was really not ready to give up, but the weather was not on his side. Suddenly, a heavy snowfall started, severely limiting visibility. Steven had no choice but to keep moving forward, trying to close in a bit more. But his plans were thwarted when he spotted another hunter across the way, likely the one who had spooked the male Milu deer. Steven decided to flank around to the front, waiting for this hunter to drive the deer towards him. His choice proved correct, as not long after he arrived at the spot, the deer emerged from the woods. However, it was a bittersweet sight, as the group contained only 1 juvenile male Milu deer. According to local laws, only fully mature male Milu deer can be hunted. As the day darkened and the temperature dropped sharply, Steven had no choice but to call it a day. The next morning, he returned to the same area to continue the hunt he hadn't completed. Today seemed more promising. He spotted a legal male Milu deer on the ridge. Steven decided to wait ahead, where the Milu deer were likely to pass. But his happiness was short-lived, as he soon realized another hunter had the same idea. Steven needed to act fast, and it was clear the other hunter had seen him too. Both pretended not to notice the Milu deer, hoping to mislead the other's judgment. After observing a while, Steven was sure the other hunter was targeting this same Milu deer. Not wanting to start a conflict, he chose to back off. He was generous because he knew of another backup hunting spot, a tip from a friend. This place, known as Breakleg Ledge, was named for its steep terrain, where Milu deer sometimes roll off the path. Steven had worked hard to get here, and his effort seemed to pay off. He had just taken out his binoculars when he spotted a group of Milu deer. But after a closer look, he realized they were all females and young deer, with no males among them. So, Stephen sat for several hours, watching many healthy deer pass by. Unfortunately, apart from one juvenile, he hadn't seen any male that met the requirements. Sitting for hours made him increasingly cold, and hypothermia is a real mountain killer. He had to start a fire to warm up his body and clear his thoughts while planning his next move. 3 miles away, on the opposite side of the valley, Stephen wanted to see what was there. Just then, 2 male kangaroo deer appeared in his view, putting him in a dilemma. If he went after these 2 kangaroo deer, he might not complete the hunt before dark. At the same time, he was still thinking about the current spot he was in, worrying that if a male Milu deer showed up, he might miss it completely. Choosing whether to stay or go was a tough decision for him. But after thinking it over, Stephen decided to stay put. If today's hunt failed, he'd try the other side of the valley tomorrow. And as expected, he didn't see any male deer appear. The next morning, at dawn, Stephen set off again, heading to the place where he saw the 2 males yesterday. By the time it was fully light, Stephen had arrived. The snow was covered with messy deer tracks. He moved to a higher ground and began to quietly wait. In the following hours, Stephen's heart sank because he couldn't see any male Milu deer. He couldn't help regretting not decisively tracking those 2 Milu deer yesterday. That's hunting for you. If you don't seize the moment, failure is inevitable. Stephen learned from this experience and had no choice but to end this hunt. Next hunting season, he'd try hunting kangaroo deer again. Hunting grizzly bears is an exhilarating and dangerous activity. A moment's inattention could be fatal. Yet, it often attracts a throng of hunters, and Stephen is one of them. He even feels an urge to wrestle a grizzly to experience the power of such a massive creature. This is in British Columbia's Rocky Mountains, a place with a very primitive ecosystem and home to a variety of wildlife, including black and grizzly bears. This was Stephen's first time in this region, accompanied by his good friend Ryan, who is also a passionate hunter and a licensed hunting guide. As they sampled berries along the way, moving up the mountain, they climbed about 1,000 feet and spotted a huge grizzly bear. Through binoculars, they saw it was with cubs. Stephen felt amazed. Observing grizzly bears up close was a rare experience. This had to be a mother bear, as a male would have likely killed the cubs. Out of a principle of protection, Stephen's target was a mature male bear. So after watching for a while, they moved on to look for other grizzlies. But soon, they spotted a black bear, which was in a tricky situation as it had wandered into grizzly territory. The mother bear was furiously heading its way. They were excited to watch this unfold, but then noticed another grizzly in the distance. Now they were getting restless, because they had a producer, John, about 300 yards away, and the situation looked grim. Unaware, he might accidentally walk into the conflict. After searching for a while, they couldn't find John, but ended up face to face with the mother bear. They shouted loudly, trying to scare her off, but she, intent on protecting her cubs, charged at them bravely. They had no choice but to keep firing, trying to scare the mother bear away with the noise. Luckily, it worked, and the bear backed off. They quickly moved to a different spot. The shots also got John's attention, and they rushed to his location. They successfully met up with their buddy. Only then did they calm down from the tense situation. The next morning, they crawled out of their tents and started their hunting day. Soon, they saw a grizzly bear, but it wasn't fully grown yet. It had a small, narrow head and prominent ears. That's how you spot a young grizzly. Mature males have broader shoulders and longer necks. They moved to a ridge overlooking the valley from above. Soon, Ryan spotted something, but after a closer look, it turned out to be a female. So, they went deeper, searching for other bears. There were plenty of grizzlies around, but all were either females or cubs. Watching them play and fight was quite entertaining. They did encounter a bear, but it was a black bear. Its fur was shiny too, but they were after grizzlies, so it luckily escaped this time. Empty-handed, they returned to camp. But right near the camp, they spotted a huge black bear. Though it wasn't part of the original plan, an opportunity like this couldn't be missed. Steven took aim, and the bear was unaware of the danger. The next second, a gunshot shattered the silence. The bear dropped and started rolling down the hill, picking up speed. They kept their eyes on the target to make sure of its location. After waiting a moment, they went to find their prey. They split up, and Ryan was the one who found the black bear. It wasn't quite dead, so Steven fired another shot, ending its life for good. As night fell, they used their headlamps to start butchering the black bear. Opening its belly, they could smell blueberries, indicating berries were its main diet. After a long day, they were exhausted, so after removing the organs, they decided to come back tomorrow to finish the job. The next morning, they rushed to the site, but their worries came true. A grizzly bear was feasting on the organs. It was a female. They shouted, trying to drive it away, but this only piqued its curiosity. It started walking towards them. Steven had no choice but to use gunshots to scare it off. But this bear seemed a bit clueless to gunfire, possibly never having encountered hunters before. Fortunately, it eventually wandered off. They then moved forward and retrieved the black bear from yesterday. Luckily, it hadn't been eaten by the grizzly. They packed the bear meat into categories and brought it back to camp. After hanging the meat in a tree, they set off again. Their target was still a grizzly bear. They hiked over mountains, reaching a high peak. Soon after sitting down, they spotted a grizzly bear. However, its fur looked like it might be albino. They decided to find another target. After some searching, they found another grizzly bear, a male this time. They quickly chased after it, but the bear was also on the move, so catching up was up to fate. Unfortunately, luck wasn't on their side, and they lost track of it. With daylight dwindling, they headed back to camp to enjoy a hearty meal. They selected some fatty cuts, chopped them up, and rendered the fat by heating it. Then, they prepared some marbled bear loin, cooking it in the fat. After a short wait, the meat was ready. They tasted it, finding it extremely satisfying and chewy, full of flavor with hints of blueberries. Though they didn't bag a grizzly, catching a black bear was still worthwhile. A man, named Steven, hunted a black bear, gaining a batch of quality bear meat. He rendered the fat, cooked the loin in it, and had a sumptuous meal. Steven is a full-time hunter and a gourmet. This time he was in the southwestern part of Wisconsin, where his friend Doug runs a farm. His backyard is full of white-tailed deer, but recently their numbers have been overwhelming, affecting the growth of oak saplings. So he hunts several mature deer each year to control the population, ensuring the farm's sustainable development. There are 2 days left until hunting season, but the weather forecast predicts a heavy storm. Steven and Doug are scouting the area, as 2 apprentices will join the hunt, and Steven needs to arrange everything before they arrive. The key preparation is ensuring deer appear in the area, so Doug installed a device in a tree, his homemade bait filled with fruit juice, which deer can smell from afar. Though deer are the main target, the ultimate goal is for the apprentices to enjoy themselves. Thus, Steven plans to set some beaver traps, so if the deer hunt fails, they won't be without meat. The riverbank is filled with fresh willows, the work of beavers. Steven just needs to place traps along their paths. To guide the beavers into the traps, he uses branches to set paths, and will check back in a day or 2. The next morning at 5, Steven and Doug arrived at the river. They threw some duck decoys into the water, waited half an hour, and a flock of wild ducks swooped in. The opportunity was fleeting. They stood up and fired several shots, watching as one duck after another fell from the sky. The scene was quite a sight. Wild ducks are one of Steven's favorite dishes. The 2 collected the ducks they had shot and laid them out on a log. 6 ducks in total, enough for a hearty meal. Steven got right to work on the ducks. This time, he decided to make beer duck, using strong beer mixed with maple syrup, then adding brown sugar, cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg. After the sauce thickened, he set it aside. Then he fried the duck meat in a skillet. The sizzling sound was music to his ears. Once both sides were golden brown, he put them in the oven to crisp up the skin. A little later, the 2 apprentices finally arrived. They were the comedians from before, who had enjoyed deer hunting in Montana years ago. Their adventurous spirit was stirred up again. After some warm greetings, the duck in the oven was about ready. Stephen sliced it up, arranged it nicely on plates, and drizzled the sauce over the duck. The beer duck was ready. A delicious dish indeed. They all enjoyed the meal and chatted, creating a joyful atmosphere. After dinner, Doug gave the two a commemorative cap. Then they got down to business. Stephen and Joe were to wait at the first canyon exit, while the other two headed to a ridge hunting spot.